so you cannot concentrate because you're thinking more about your work. So I presume that you have lots of work and that takes a lot of time away from your study hours. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there any way, any system that you use to study your subject?
No, I don't have any system. I don't have any schedule for the study.
Is the counselor using the appropriate tone of voice? What is the effect of the tone of voice to the client? Discuss. In this situation, the counselor may be effective. He is speaking to the client in a soft and slow tone to show the client that he's interested in the client. Do you think the counselor is able to interpret the client's message in this situation? Who is in control of the discussion? Discuss. In this situation, the counselor is speaking more than the client. He is controlling the discussion. This could have a negative impact on the client, as the client may feel that the counselor is more interested in his own opinion than listening to him, the client. In this lesson, you have learned about the 4 types of attending skills, which are simple responses, responses reflecting message and feelings, reinforcement, and paraphrasing. You have also learned about the 4 levels of attending skills that a counselor should know. Understanding the 4 types of attending skills and the levels of attending skills will enable a counselor to have effective communication with a client. There are some counseling skills that can be used by a counselor in the counseling process. These skills can be used as a guide for counselors to build a counseling relationship with the client. Specific skills that can be used in a counseling process are open and close-ended questions, minimal encouragement, paraphrasing, concluding, reflection of feelings, confrontation, focusing, interpretation of meaning. Appropriate questioning can help a counselor to understand and communicate with the client better. It can also direct, expand, or close a discussion. A counselor can use open-ended questions to allow the client to give an extensive response. On the other hand, a counselor can use close-ended questions to elicit short and specific information from the client. You can begin open or close-ended questions with the words what, how, and why. A client needs to know that he or she is being understood. A counselor can encourage the client by giving a nod of his head and saying appropriate responses. Examples of appropriate responses are, carry on. Yes, I understand. Paraphrasing is retelling the client's story in a short and accurate manner. This is to tell the client that the counselor understands and is following the client's story. Concluding is almost similar to paraphrasing. The counselor needs to listen to the client extensively before giving his response. Sometimes concluding is used at the beginning of a session to recall the previous session. The client will tell his or her difficulties. This will involve emotions. When a counselor gives an emotional reflection, it is telling the client that he or she has understood the client's feelings. Confrontation is an invitation to the client to see himself in more depth and not always in a safe and comfortable zone. Confrontation can be used when the relationship of the counselor and the client is very stable. Confrontation used at the initial stage of the relationship may cause the client to be challenged and threatened. A counselor needs to direct the discussion to specific and relevant situations. By focusing, a counselor can set the context of the story to make the issue more specific and relevant. Reflection of meaning is the ability of the counselor to empathize the client's feelings and situations the client has gone through. The counselor needs to understand the overall story and interpret the gist of the story. Reflection of meaning is not necessarily interjected by the counselor. With the counselor's encouragement and help, the client can also give his or her reflection to explore and find the meaning of the client's actions or feelings. There are 8 basic skills that a counselor should know: open and close-ended questions, minimal encouragement, paraphrasing, concluding, emotional reflection, confrontation, focusing, interpretation of meaning. The behavioral counseling theory is one approach that can be used in a counseling process. The behavioral approach consists of 2 types of learning approaches. 1. Classical conditioning, and 2. Operant conditioning. The principle of classical conditioning is the result of the research of Pavlov 1960 and Hull 1943. John B. Watson used Pavlov's principle of classical conditioning to condition little Albert to have a fear of white rats, cotton, white, and Watson's white hair. In this experiment, Watson used a bell as an unconditional stimulus and a white rat as a conditional stimulus. This resulted in a conditional response of shock and fear. Watson's experiment has become the basis for the understanding of the behaviorism theory. This experiment shows that a person's emotions can be learned and changed according to the principles of learning. This would enable a change in behavior. Operant conditioning is the second approach of the behaviorism theory. Operant conditioning was found by B.F. Skinner in 1953. The principle of operant conditioning uses reinforcement to ensure that the new behavior is repeated. This is because reinforcement has the element of comfort. There are 2 types of reinforcement: positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement can come in the monetary form or praises. For example, Sufyan scored 100% for one of his papers. His teacher praises him in front of his friends. Sufyan is now motivated to score 100% for other papers as well. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is to diminish negative stimulus such as electric shock or the loud noise of a bell. For example, diminishing the loud noise of a bell whenever a rat presses a bar. This would encourage the rat to press the bar more often as the noise disappears. Punishment and extinction reduces the chances of the repetition of undesirable behavior. Punishment is to use uncomfortable or painful stimulus such as using electric shock after a person smokes. Extinction is also used to reduce undesirable behavior such as interfering the conversation of an older group of people. In this case, it would be sufficient not to respond to the person who interferes. Negative reinforcement will result in a change of behavior. Let's compare the 2 learning approaches. The classical conditioning approach shows that an unconditional stimulus and a conditional stimulus are needed to produce a change in behavior. On the other hand, the operant conditioning approach emphasizes on the use of reinforcement to enable a change in behavior. In this lesson, you have learned about the two types of behavioral learning approaches. The first approach is classical conditioning. This approach uses an unconditional and conditional stimulus to enable a change in behavior. The second approach is operant conditioning. This approach further enhances the classical conditioning approach. It uses reinforcement to enable a change in behavior.